The impossible discovery. The crystalline spires of Zarthora's capital city glimmered in the light of its twin suns, casting prismatic reflections across the sweeping plains of purple grass. Within the grandest of these towers, Princess Ilara of the Zarthorian people paced nervously in her private chambers, her iridescent skin shimmering with anxiety. For weeks, she had been plagued by strange symptoms: fatigue, nausea, and an inexplicable feeling of change within her body. At first, she had dismissed these sensations as stress from her royal duties. But as the days wore on, she could no longer ignore the growing suspicion that something was profoundly wrong. With a trembling hand, Ilara activated the holographic communicator on her wrist. "Summon Chief Medical Officer Zilvax to my chambers immediately," she commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Within moments, the door to her room slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the tall, slender form of Zilvax. His 4 eyes blinked in concern as he took in the princess's distressed state. "Your Highness," he said, bowing deeply. "How may I be of service?" Ilara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Zilvax, I need you to conduct a full medical examination. Something is different. I fear I may be ill." The medical officer nodded, his expression grave. He produced a handheld scanner from his robes and began to pass it over Ilara's body. As the device hummed and beeped, Zilvax's eyes widened in disbelief. This cannot be," he muttered, tapping frantically at the scanner's display. Ilara's heart raced. "What is it? What's wrong with me?" Zilvax looked up, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in succession, a sign of extreme agitation among his people. "Your Highness, according to these readings, you are with child." The words hit Ilara like a physical blow. She staggered backwards, gripping the edge of a nearby table for support. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You know as well as anyone that I am incapable of bearing children. Our entire species." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. It was common knowledge throughout the galaxy that the Zarthorian people had long since lost the ability to reproduce naturally. For millennia, they had relied on advanced cloning technology to perpetuate their species. The concept of natural birth was as alien to them as the distant stars. Zilvax nodded solemnly. "I am aware, Your Highness, and yet the evidence is irrefutable. You are approximately 6 weeks into gestation." Ilara's mind reeled. 6 weeks. That would place the impossible conception right around the time of the human delegation. She breathed, her eyes widening in horror. Just over a month ago, a diplomatic mission from Earth had visited Zarthor. It was the first official contact between their two species, a momentous occasion filled with ceremony and cultural exchange. Ilara had been at the forefront of the welcoming committee, eager to learn about these strange beings from a distant world. But now, as the implications of her condition sank in, that joyous memory took on a sinister cast. Had one of the humans somehow done this to her? Was it an accident or something more nefarious? "We must inform the High Council immediately," Zilvax said, his voice tight with urgency. "This development could have far-reaching consequences for our people and our relationship with Earth." Ilara nodded numbly, her mind still struggling to process the enormity of the situation. As Zilvax turned to leave, she called out to him, "Wait, before we tell anyone else, I need you to promise me something." The medical officer paused, turning back to face her. "Anything, Your Highness. Swear to me that you will approach this scientifically," Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. "No matter what suspicions or fears arise, we must seek the truth. The future of our people, and perhaps of humanity as well, may depend on it." Zilvax bowed deeply. "You have my word, Princess Ilara. We will get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter where it leads us." As the door closed behind him, Ilara turned to gaze out at the gleaming city beyond her window. Her hand unconsciously drifted to her abdomen, where a life that should not exist was growing within her. In that moment, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The news of Princess Ilara's pregnancy spread through the Zarthorian capital like wildfire. Within hours, emergency sessions of the High Council had been called, security measures throughout the city had been heightened, and a cloud of fear and suspicion had descended upon the once peaceful world. In the Grand Council chamber, voices rose in a cacophony of shock and outrage. High Councillor Drazur, his aged face creased with worry, called for order. Silence, he thundered, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. We must approach this situation with calm and reason. As the clamor died down, Ilara stepped forward. She had insisted on being present for this meeting, despite the protests of her advisors. Honored members of the council, she began, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. I know that this news comes as a shock to us all. Believe me when I say that I am as bewildered as any of you, but we must not let fear cloud our judgment. Murmurs rippled through the assembled councillors. Drazur nodded gravely. Well said, Princess. Now we must consider our next steps carefully. Chief Medical Officer Zilvax, what can you tell us about this unprecedented situation? Zilvax stepped forward, his customary calm demeanor strained by the weight of the moment. Esteemed councillors, I have conducted every test at our disposal. The results are conclusive. Princess Ilara is indeed carrying a child. However, the fetus exhibits genetic markers that are not entirely Zarthorian. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Councillor Vexera, known for her hawkish stance on interstellar relations, leaped to her feet. Are you saying that this child is part human? That one of those aliens violated our princess? Ilara's face flushed with anger. I was not violated, Counselor. I had no intimate contact with any member of the human delegation. Whatever has happened here, it was not the result of any misconduct. Drazur raised a hand for silence. We must not jump to conclusions. Zilvax, what else can you tell us about the nature of this pregnancy? The medical officer hesitated. The truth is, honored counselors, we are in uncharted territory. The genetic structure of this fetus is unlike anything we have ever encountered. It appears to be a true hybrid of Zarthorian and human DNA, but how such a thing is possible, I cannot say with certainty. As the council erupted into debate once more, Ilara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The weight of the situation, the accusations, the fear in the eyes of her people, it was all too much. She swayed on her feet, and in an instant, Zilvax was at her side, supporting her. Your Highness needs rest, he announced firmly. I must insist that we adjourn this meeting and allow the princess to retire to her chambers. Drazur nodded in agreement. Very well. We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss our next steps. In the meantime, I am placing the palace on lockdown. No one enters or leaves without my express permission. As Ilara was led from the chamber, she could feel the eyes of the council upon her, some filled with concern, others with suspicion, and still others with a fear that chilled her to her core. She knew that the coming days would test her in ways she could scarcely imagine. Back in her private chambers, Ilara sank onto a plush recliner, her mind racing. As Zilvax fussed over her, checking her vital signs, and muttering to himself, she found her thoughts drifting to the human delegation. She recalled their strange, soft skin, their curious eyes, and the warmth of their smiles. Had they known this would happen? Was it all part of some grand plan? No, she told herself firmly. She had seen the genuine wonder and goodwill in their eyes. Whatever had caused this impossible pregnancy, she couldn't believe it was intentional. Zilvax, she said suddenly, causing the medical officer to start. I need you to do something for me. He looked at her quizzically. Of course, Your Highness. What do you require? I need you to contact Earth, she said, her voice low but determined. Discreetly, if possible. We need their help to understand what's happening to me. Zilvax's eyes widened in alarm. But Your Highness, the Council, will not approve. I know, Ilara finished for him. But they're not thinking clearly. The humans are the only ones who might be able to shed light on this situation. We need their scientific expertise." For a long moment, Zilvax was silent, clearly torn between his duty to the council and his loyalty to the princess. Finally, he nodded. "I will do as you ask, Your Highness, but we must be cautious. If word of this gets out—" Ilara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I know the risks, old friend, but I also know that the future of our people, and perhaps of humanity as well, may depend on what we discover. We must be brave." As Zilvax left to make the covert communication, Ilara turned her gaze to the stars visible through her window. Somewhere out there, on a blue planet circling the yellow sun, were the answers she sought. And perhaps, she thought with a mixture of fear and excitement, the key to a future she had never dared to imagine. Little did she know that her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of two civilizations forever. Human delegation under scrutiny. The sleek, silver spacecraft of the human diplomatic corps descended through Zarthora's atmosphere, its hull gleaming in the light of the twin suns. Inside, Ambassador Sarah Chen fought to keep her composure as she briefed her team one final time. "Remember," she said, her dark eyes scanning the faces before her, "we're walking into a potentially volatile situation. The Zarthorians have been less than forthcoming about why they've requested our presence so urgently. Stay alert, and for heaven's sake, don't do anything to provoke them." Dr. Ethan Reeves, the team's xenobiologist, raised his hand. "Any word on whether this has something to do with our last visit? The timing seems suspicious." Sarah shook her head. "Your guess is as good as mine, Doctor. All we know is that it involves Princess Ilara, and that it's classified at the highest levels. We'll find out soon enough." As the ship touched down on the crystalline landing pad, Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The airlock hissed open, and she led her team out into the alien air. They were greeted not by the usual delegation of smiling officials, but by a phalanx of stern-faced Zarthorian guards. At their head stood High Counselor Drazur, his expression unreadable. "Ambassador Chen," he said, his voice cool. "Welcome back to Zarthora. I trust your journey was uneventful." Sarah bowed slightly, a gesture she knew the Zarthorians appreciated. It was, "High Counselor, thank you for your hospitality. Might I ask why we've been summoned so urgently?" Drazur's four eyes blinked in rapid succession. "All will be explained in due time, Ambassador. For now, please follow me. Your team will be escorted to separate quarters for debriefing." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at his words. She glanced back at her team, seeing her own unease mirrored in their faces. "I'm afraid I must insist that we remain together, High Counselor. Standard diplomatic protocol." "Your protocols do not apply here," Drazur cut her off sharply. "Not in light of recent developments. You will comply, or you will leave. The choice is yours." For a tense moment, Sarah weighed her options. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, but I expect my team to be treated with the utmost respect and care." "Of course," Drazur said, though his tone held little warmth. "This way, Ambassador." As Sarah was led away, she caught one last glimpse of her team being escorted in different directions. She silently prayed that she hadn't just made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, in a secluded wing of the palace, Princess Ilara paced anxiously. Her condition had progressed rapidly over the past week, her body changing in ways that both fascinated and terrified the Zarthorian medical staff. She placed a hand on her slightly swollen abdomen, marveling at the life growing within her, a life that should have been impossible. The door chimed softly, and Zilvax entered, his expression grave. "Your Highness," he said, bowing. "The human delegation has arrived. The High Council is interrogating them as we speak." Ilara's heart sank. "Interrogating? Zilvax, that wasn't the plan. We were supposed to approach them openly, seek their help." The medical officer shook his head. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. The Council overruled your wishes. They suspect the humans may have done this to you intentionally." That's absurd, Ilara exclaimed. You've seen the data yourself. This pregnancy is as much a mystery to them as it is to us. I know, Zilvax said softly, but fear and suspicion are powerful motivators. The Council is afraid, Your Highness, afraid of what this means for our people, for our place in the galaxy. Ilara sank into a chair, her mind racing. We have to do something, she said. If we alienate the humans now, we may lose our only chance at understanding what's happening to me, and what it means for both our species. Zilvax hesitated, then leaned in close. There might be a way, he whispered, but it's risky, if we're caught. Tell me, Ilara said, her eyes gleaming with determination. As Zilvax outlined his plan, neither of them noticed the small, spider-like drone clinging to the ceiling, its camera lens focused intently on their conspiratorial huddle. In a dimly lit room deep within the palace, Sarah Chen sat across from Counselor Vexera, her patience wearing thin. For hours, she had been subjected to a barrage of questions, each more accusatory than the last. I'll ask you one more time, Ambassador, Vexera said, her voice dripping with barely concealed hostility. What did your people do to Princess Ilara? Sarah fought to keep her voice level. And I'll tell you again, Counselor, we did nothing to your princess. The last time we were here, all interactions were public and monitored. If you have evidence to the contrary, I suggest you present it. Vexera slammed her hand on the table. Evidence? The evidence is growing inside her, as we speak. A hybrid child, part Zarthorian, part human. How do you explain that? Sarah's eyes widened in shock. A hybrid child. That was impossible, wasn't it? She thought back to the briefings she'd received before the first diplomatic mission, the warnings about potential biological incompatibilities. Nothing had prepared her for this. I don't know how to explain it, she admitted. But I swear to you, if this is true, it was not a deliberate act on our part. We're as shocked as you are. Vexera leaned back, her eyes narrowing. Perhaps, or perhaps this is all part of some grand human scheme. A way to insinuate yourselves into our society, to change us from within. Sarah couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the accusation. With all due respect, Counselor, that's ridiculous. We barely understand your biology. The idea that we could engineer something like this, it's beyond our capabilities. Is it? Vexera asked, her tone dangerous. We've seen the rate at which your species advances. Who knows what secrets you're hiding? Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open. High Counselor Drazur entered, his face a mask of fury. The princess, he sputtered. She's gone. Vexera leaped to her feet. What? How? Drazur's eyes locked onto Sarah. It seemed she had help. From one of yours. Sarah's blood ran cold. What had her team gotten themselves into? As alarms began to blare throughout the palace, Sarah realized that the diplomatic crisis she had feared had just become something far more dangerous. Somewhere in the sprawling city, a pregnant alien princess was on the run with a human accomplice, and the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. The next few hours were a blur of accusations, denials, and frantic activity. Sarah found herself confined to a luxurious, but clearly guarded suite, cut off from her team and any news of what was happening outside. She paced the room, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information she'd gathered. A hybrid child, an impossible pregnancy, a princess on the run. None of it made sense, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the precipice of something monumental. If only she could talk to Ilara, or to whoever on her team had apparently aided in her escape. As night fell over Zarthora, casting long shadows across the crystalline cityscape, Sarah stood at the window of her gilded cage. Somewhere out there, answers awaited, and she was determined to find them, no matter the cost. Little did she know that deep beneath the city, in forgotten tunnels that predated even the Zarthorian civilization, Princess Ilara and Dr. Ethan Reeves were making a discovery that would shake the foundations of both their worlds. A discovery that would prove that the impossible was not only possible, but had been written in the stars since the dawn of time. The stage was set for a collision of cultures, a test of trust, and a revelation that would forever change the course of two species. As Zarthora's twin suns set, bathing the city in an ethereal glow, the true adventure was only just beginning. Unraveling the mystery. In the damp, echoing tunnels beneath Zarthora's glittering capital, Princess Ilara and Dr. Ethan Reeves moved swiftly, their footsteps muffled by the soft phosphorescent moss that carpeted the ancient passageways. Ilara's bioluminescent skin cast a soft glow, illuminating the way forward. "Are you sure about this, Your Highness?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we're caught." Ilara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with determination. "We have no choice, Dr. Reeves. The answers we seek are down here, I'm certain of it. And please, call me Ilara. I think we're past formalities at this point." Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the gravity of their situation. When Zilvax had secretly contacted him, explaining the princess's condition and her plan to seek answers in these forgotten tunnels, he'd known he had to help. The scientific implications alone were staggering, not to mention the potential diplomatic consequences. As they rounded a corner, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Ilara gasped, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen abdomen. Before them stood an enormous structure, its surface covered in intricate, glowing symbols. "By the suns," Ilara breathed. "I've never seen anything like this. These markings, they're not Zarthorian." Ethan approached the structure, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. He ran a hand over the symbols, feeling a faint vibration beneath his fingers. "You're right," he said, excitement creeping into his voice. "If I had to guess, I'd say this predates your civilization by thousands of years, at least." As they examined the structure, a section of it suddenly illuminated, responding to their presence. A holographic display sprang to life, filling the chamber with swirling patterns of light. It's a map," Ethan realized, his eyes widening. "A genetic map. Look, these patterns here. They're DNA sequences, but not like anything I've ever seen." Ilara stepped closer, her own scientific training allowing her to grasp the significance of what they were seeing. "It's a blueprint," she said softly. "A blueprint for us, for Zarthorians and humans, together." As they watched in awe, the holographic display showed the intertwining of two distinct genetic codes, merging and evolving over eons. The final result was a being that looked remarkably like the child growing inside Ilara. "This is impossible," Ethan muttered, even as the evidence stared him in the face. "It's suggesting that our species, that we were engineered, designed to be compatible." Ilara's mind reeled at the implications. But why? And by whom? Our histories, our evolution, it all seemed so natural, so random. Ethan finished for her. "Maybe that's what we were meant to think. But this changes everything." As they delved deeper into the data displayed before them, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The unique radiation from Zarthora's twin moons, the seemingly impossible pregnancy, the rapid advancements of both their species, it had all been part of a grand design. "We were meant to find each other," Ilara said, her voice filled with wonder. "Our meetings, our alliance, it wasn't chance. It was the culmination of a plan set in motion millennia ago." Ethan nodded, his scientific mind racing with the possibilities. But why? What's the endgame? And who could have had the power, the foresight, to engineer something on this scale? Before Ilara could respond, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels. Footsteps, growing closer. "We're out of time," she said, her expression hardening. "We need to get this information to the surface, to both our peoples. It's the only way to stop this conflict before it spirals out of control." Ethan quickly pulled out a small device, scanning and recording as much of the holographic data as he could. "I just hope they'll believe us," he said grimly. As the footsteps grew louder, Ilara grabbed Ethan's hand. "There's another way out, through the old aqueducts. Quickly." They raced through the twisting tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer. Ilara's pregnancy slowed her down, and Ethan found himself supporting more of her weight as they ran. "Leave me," she gasped at one point. "You have to get the information out." Ethan shook his head firmly. "Not a chance. You're high, Ilara. We're in this together now." As they emerged from a hidden entrance on the outskirts of the city, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. Ilara looked back at the gleaming spires of the capital, her heart heavy with the weight of what they'd discovered. "What now?" she asked, turning to Ethan. He met her gaze, his expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Now," he said, "we changed the course of history." Meanwhile, back in the palace, Ambassador Sarah Chen was reaching the limits of her patience. The Zarthorian guards had been tight-lipped, refusing to give her any information about her team or the situation with Princess Ilara. As she paced her opulent prison, a plan began to form in her mind. Using skills she'd hoped never to need in her diplomatic career, Sarah managed to override the room's security systems. As the door slid open, she steeled herself for what lay ahead. She had to find her team, uncover the truth, and somehow prevent an interstellar incident that could doom both their species. Little did Sarah know that the truth she sought was racing towards the city, carried by an unlikely pair of fugitives. As Zarthora's twin suns climbed higher in the sky, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of two civilizations. In the heart of the city, High Counselor Drazur stood before the assembled Zarthorian leadership, his face grave. "We have no choice," he announced. "We must assume the humans are hostile. Prepare our defenses. If they will not return the princess and explain their actions, we will consider it an act of war." As murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, a lone voice spoke up. It was Zilvax, his eyes blazing with a mix of fear and determination. "Wait," he cried. "There's something you all need to know, something that changes everything." All eyes turned to the medical officer as he began to speak, unraveling a tale that would shake the very foundations of their world. As the truth of Ilara's condition and the ancient prophecy came to light, the fate of two species hung in the balance, teetering between war and a new era of unprecedented cooperation. The race was on to bring together the scattered pieces of the puzzle. The fugitive princess, the determined ambassador, the revelations hidden beneath the city, before mistrust and fear could tear apart everything they had worked so hard to build. As the tension in the city reached a fever pitch, none could have predicted the earth-shattering events that were about to unfold. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of Zarthora and Earth, but the very future of life in the galaxy itself. Diplomatic crisis and breakthrough. The Zarthorian capital was in chaos. Sirens wailed across the crystalline cityscape as security forces combed every street, alley, and building for the missing princess and her human accomplice. In the sky, sleek patrol ships crisscrossed the air, their sensors scanning for any sign of the fugitives. Ambassador Sarah Chen moved stealthily through the shadows of the city's lower levels, her diplomatic training giving way to long-dormant instincts from her days in intelligence work. She had managed to slip out of the palace undetected, but she knew it was only a matter of time before her absence was discovered. As she navigated the unfamiliar terrain, Sarah's mind raced. She needed to find her team, locate Princess Ilara and Dr. Reeves, and somehow prevent an interstellar war. Just another day at the office, she thought grimly. A sudden commotion up ahead caught her attention. Pressing herself against a wall, Sarah peered around a corner to see a group of Zarthorian guards escorting a familiar figure, Dr. Maria Valdez, the team's cultural anthropologist. "I'm telling you, I don't know anything about the princess's disappearance," Maria protested as she was roughly pushed along. Sarah's jaw clenched. She couldn't leave her colleague behind, but a direct confrontation would blow what little cover she had left. As she weighed her options, a hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, pulling her back into the shadows. She reacted instantly, driving an elbow into her attacker's solar plexus. There was a muffled grunt, and the grip loosened. Sarah spun around, ready to strike again, only to find herself face to face with a wheezing Zilvax. "Ambassador," he gasped, clutching his midsection. "Please, I'm here to help." Sarah eyed him warily. "Why should I trust you?" Zilvax straightened, his four eyes blinking rapidly. "Because right now, I'm the only friend you have in this city, and because I know where Ilara and your Dr. Reeves are headed." Across the city, Ilara and Ethan were making their way through a maze of maintenance tunnels, trying to reach the central communications hub. If they could broadcast the truth to both their peoples, they might have a chance at averting disaster. "How much further?" Ethan asked, supporting Ilara as she navigated the narrow passageways. "Not far now," she replied, her breath coming in short gasps. The pregnancy was taking its toll, her body changing more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. "Once we reach the hub, we'll have access to every screen and comm device in the city." As they rounded a corner, they found their path blocked by a security checkpoint. Two guards stood at attention, their energy weapons at the ready. "Your Highness," one of the guards exclaimed, clearly shocked to see the missing princess. "You need to come with us immediately. The whole city is looking for you." Ilara stepped forward, her regal bearing on full display despite her disheveled appearance. "Stand aside," she commanded. "What we carry is vital to the future of our people, of all people." The guards hesitated, torn between their duty and their ingrained respect for the royal family. Ethan tensed, ready for a confrontation. But before anyone could make a move, a voice crackled over the guards' communication devices. "This is High Counselor Drazur. All units, be advised. Princess Ilara and the human scientist are to be escorted to the Grand Assembly Hall immediately. Do not impede their progress. Repeat, escort them to the Grand Assembly Hall." The guards looked at each other in confusion, then back at Ilara and Ethan. "Your Highness," one said, bowing slightly, "if you'll follow us." As they were led through the city, Ilara and Ethan exchanged puzzled glances. This was an unexpected turn of events, but was it a fortunate one? Meanwhile, in the Grand Assembly Hall, a tense standoff was unfolding. Sarah Chen, having been brought there by Zilvax, stood before the assembled Zarthorian High Council. Her team, now freed from their separate confinements, flanked her. "I implore you to reconsider your actions," Sarah was saying, her diplomat's composure firmly in place despite the gravity of the situation. "Whatever has happened here, war between our peoples will solve nothing. We must approach this rationally, scientifically." Counselor Vexera scoffed. "Rationally? Your people have abducted our princess, manipulated her biology for some nefarious purpose. How can we trust anything you say?" Before Sarah could respond, the doors to the hall burst open. All heads turned to see Princess Ilara enter, supported by Dr. Ethan Reeves. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly at the sight of the clearly pregnant princess alongside the human scientist. "Enough." Ilara's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs that had begun to rise. "We have all been pawns in a game far greater than we could have imagined. But now, we have the truth." Ethan stepped forward, holding up the device containing the data they had discovered. "What we found changes everything we thought we knew about our species, about our place in the universe." As Ethan began to explain their discoveries, projecting the ancient genetic blueprints for all to see, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. Shock gave way to wonder, suspicion to curiosity. Sarah watched in amazement as the truth unfolded. The ancient plan, the deliberate engineering of their species for compatibility, the role of Zarthora's unique radiation in activating long-dormant genetic potential. "Don't you see?" Ilara said, her voice filled with passion. "We were meant to come together. This child," she placed a hand on her swollen abdomen, "is not an aberration. It's the fulfillment of a plan set in motion eons ago. The hall erupted in a cacophony of voices, questions, exclamations, arguments. But as the implications of what they were hearing sank in, a new sentiment began to emerge. Hope. High Counselor Drazur raised his hands for silence. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of history. If what you say is true, then we stand at a crossroads unlike any our people have faced before. The question now is, where do we go from here? All eyes turned to Sarah and Ilara, the representatives of two species that had just discovered their intertwined destiny. As they exchanged glances, both women knew that their next words would shape the future of not just their own peoples, but potentially of all life in the galaxy. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, awaiting the decision that would either plunge them into conflict or usher in an era of unprecedented cooperation and discovery. As the twin suns of Zarthora began to set, bathing the Grand Assembly Hall in an ethereal light, Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute. "We go forward," she said, "together." The course of history was about to change forever. A new era of understanding. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with a mixture of excitement and apprehension as delegates from both Zarthora and Earth gathered for the historic joint session. It had been 6 months since the revelations about the ancient genetic engineering project had come to light, and the implications were still rippling through both societies. Princess Ilara, her pregnancy now in its final stages, sat at the center of the Zarthorian delegation. Beside her, Ambassador Sarah Chen represented Earth, the two women having formed a close bond through the tumultuous events that had unfolded. High Counselor Drazur stepped up to the podium, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled crowd. Honored representatives of Zarthora and Earth, he began, his voice solemn. "We gather today to formalize the greatest alliance our worlds have ever known. The path that led us here was fraught with misunderstanding and peril, but it has opened our eyes to a shared destiny none could have imagined." As Drazur spoke, holographic displays around the hall showcased the incredible progress that had been made in the short time since the discovery. Joint research teams had begun to unlock the secrets hidden in the ancient genetic blueprints, leading to breakthroughs in medicine, technology, and understanding of the universe itself. Dr. Ethan Reeves, now heading the Joint Xenobiology Department, stood to present the latest findings. "The compatibility between our species goes far beyond mere biology," he explained, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "We're discovering that our cognitive processes, our very ways of perceiving the universe, are complementary. Together, we're able to solve problems and see patterns that neither species could alone." A murmur of amazement rippled through the crowd. The implications were staggering. Two species, separated by vast gulfs of space, created to work in tandem. As the session progressed, plans were laid out for expanded cooperation, joint space exploration missions, cultural exchange programs, and collaborative efforts to unlock more secrets of their shared origins. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Counselor Vexera, still skeptical, raised concerns about maintaining Zarthorian cultural identity in the face of increased human presence. "How can we be sure this alliance won't simply lead to the dilution of our way of life?" she demanded. It was Sarah who answered, her diplomatic skills honed to a fine edge over the past months. "Counselor, our goal is not to erase our differences, but to celebrate them. The strength of this alliance lies in our diversity. We have so much to learn from each other, and in doing so, we'll both become stronger." Her words seemed to resonate, and even Vexera nodded grudgingly. As the session neared its end, Princess Ilara suddenly gasped, clutching her abdomen. All eyes turned to her as she announced, with a mixture of pain and joy, "It's time. The child is coming." The assembly erupted into chaos, but it was quickly organized chaos. Within moments, a joint team of Zarthorian and human medical experts was whisking Ilara away to a specially prepared medical bay. Hours passed, the assembly waiting with bated breath. Finally, Dr. Zilvax emerged, his face beaming. The princess and the child are both doing well," he announced to cheers of relief and joy. When Ilara returned to the hall, cradling a small bundle, a hush fell over the crowd. She stood at the podium, her voice filled with emotion. "Honored delegates, I present to you the first of a new generation, a child of two worlds, born of an ancient plan and a new hope." She gently pulled back the blanket to reveal the infant, a perfect blend of Zarthorian and human features. Its skin had a subtle iridescence, its eyes a startling blend of human and Zarthorian characteristics. "In our old legends," Ilara continued, "there was a prophecy of a being who would bridge worlds and usher in an age of enlightenment. We always assumed it was metaphorical. But now," she trailed off, gazing at her child with wonder. Sarah stepped up beside her, placing the supportive hand on her shoulder. "Now we see that the universe had plans for us all along, plans that are only beginning to unfold." As the assembly broke into applause, the child opened its eyes fully for the first time. Those closest gasped in awe, for in those eyes they saw not just the merging of two species, but a glimpse of a future filled with boundless potential. Outside the hall, news of the birth spread rapidly across both worlds. In the streets of Zarthora and in cities across Earth, people gathered to celebrate. Ancient rivalries and suspicions began to fade in the light of this new shared destiny. As the twin suns of Zarthora set on this historic day, casting the crystalline spires of the capital in a warm glow, a sense of hope and anticipation filled the air. The journey ahead would not be without its challenges, but for the first time, two species separated by the vast gulfs of space looked to the future not with fear of the unknown, but with excitement for what they would discover together. The child of two worlds slept peacefully, unaware of the monumental changes it represented. Around it, humans and Zarthorians alike marveled at the new reality they found themselves in. As stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, they were no longer distant, unreachable points of light, but beacons of possibility, waiting to be explored by this new united civilization. The story of humanity and the Zarthorians was no longer one of separate paths, but of a shared journey into a future that promised to be more extraordinary than either could have imagined alone. As Ambassador Sarah Chen looked out over the celebrating crowds, a smile played on her lips. "Well," she murmured to herself, "I guess this is what they mean by humanity. Yeah." The impossible had become possible, and the adventure was only just beginning.